faced with the effects of the housing crisis is having, as we all know, it's touching all aspects of society, but in particular the effects that that's having now reaching into our schools. There doesn't seem to be any sections of society. We also had the students in today from the Trinity, from TUD and UCD. We were also talking about how that's affecting the students, and one of the issues again that was coming up around the affordability of student accommodation, the difficulty that's facing from students who have to commute in from the broader parts around the country nationally into colleges in Dublin, for instance, but into the other big cities as well. But a protest. I mean, we can see from time and time again, and as we're going back into the Dáil season now, that there's no need, then there's a bigger need now than ever, I suppose, to be addressing the issues that are coming across all the different needed councillors or communities, and we're hearing from people on the doors. There doesn't seem to be any ease up at the moment of the cost of living crisis, and as I said, that's coming in from all different sectors, and this is what we'll be covering here today. So I'm going to get, Ruth is going to come in first, and then Paul, and then we'll open up the floor for questions.
Okay, thanks Hazel. Oh yeah. So as Hazel said, we had a think in where we listened to teachers explaining about the impact of the teacher shortage and the reasons behind it. We had students in talking about commuting for hours on end, about how 2/3 of students are considering dropping out of college. So difficult is the whole experience. And I think what we saw is that the disaster, the carnage of the housing crisis is seeping into every facet of Irish life at this point. It's impacting education, it's impacting health. We can't get nurses who can afford to live in cities, and it's impacting in the care sector in general. And this in a country that has a 12 billion budget surplus, a rainy day fund, and working people that I talk to when I canvass and when we go door to door are wondering, you know, we're in our rainy day in terms of the cost of living, but yet the government is refusing to invest. All of the problems that we're seeing is the outcome of profit being placed again and again before people when it comes. So I think one of the issues that people for profit and solidarity will be raising is the need for workers to have increased pay, communities to mobilise, to demand that there's investment from this surplus, and the important first step preceding the budget on demanding that real amelioration of the problems facing workers is taken. And just lastly, I think also essential workers, the people that we spoke to today, young teachers who can't afford to live and work in cities with the result of our kids. It's a campaign that I'm involved in Dublin West, Education Coalition Dublin West, and there's people here if anyone would like to talk. I'm going into all strata of society, knocking on doors. Even people who are not directly impacted by the housing crisis cannot understand why the government is refusing to do anything about it. And it's impacting in terms of the numbers of young people, be it in Castleknock, be it in Blanchard's centre front, again and again by Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and unfortunately the Green Party as well, having no difference whatsoever.
He's on there.
Look at this.
Thanks. He hasn't done this for a while.
Yeah. I just moved that one.
Gavin's mic is like extremely unbalanced. Thank you. I mean, the people we met with today are victims of the cost of living and the housing crisis. They are representative of the majority of people in this country. The impact of the price of almost everything going up and housing being completely unaffordable. 1 in 3 families will face into this winter in a situation of energy poverty. Literally hundreds of thousands of people are going to shortly be faced with the awful choice of heating or eating. More than 1 in 10 will be forced to go to food banks in order to be able to feed their children. There's a huge crisis in Irish society, and it is deepening despite the Dáil and the Greens as utterly failed to address the cost of living and address the housing crisis. They have gotten worse and worse and worse on the watch of this government, and against those who benefit from those crises. Because at the other side of these transactions, when people go to buy, extra expensive groceries in the supermarket, or are paying for petrol at the petrol station, or are buying oil, or paying for electricity, there are companies on the other side of this equation who are doing extraordinarily well. So the banks in this country are, the electricity companies' profits are extraordinary, the big supermarket companies are extraordinary, obviously the big oil and gas comes out today and says, the government really can't take action to protect people on the cost of living measures because that would add to inflation. And dealing with it globally, they all conclude that about 2/3 of the inflation that we're seeing is a direct consequence of profiteering by these corporations. And we have a government that allows this profiteering and refuses to intervene in the market to cut across that profiteering in any way. And that's why the crisis continues to get worse for ordinary people. It's above all seen in terms of housing, where they simply refuse to do the thing that makes sense from the point of view of the majority in society, which is to build a state construction company and invest directly in building social and genuinely affordable homes. It's for that reason that we think the only way to force any action out of the government is by mobilisation, is by people power from below. Last year there was a very successful protest on the Saturday before the budget, and 30,000 people mobilised as part of the cost of living coalition. So this Saturday there's an attempt to do the same, to again mobilise thousands of people, 1 p.m. Saturday the 7th of October at Parnell Square in Dublin. And some of the issues that certainly we will be raising there, and pointing out the alternative, that it does not have to be like this, there are alternatives, is a return of the eviction ban, and this time a proper eviction ban. This is absolutely essential. The idea to allow other landlords to make people homeless is completely unconscionable. We've been trying to build maximum pressure in the Dáil as possible to say we need a reinstatement of the eviction ban. The idea that we need to have rent controls, proper rent controls that bring rents down to affordable levels. We need to have price controls on essential goods, and we need to have a renationalisation of the energy sector. Is question of mortgages. People are being absolutely crucified. Huge hundreds of thousands of people are facing bills, extra bills every month of 300, 400, 500 euros a month. That is simply unaffordable for many, at the same time that the banks say that a cap on mortgage interest rates should be introduced, that nobody is able to be charged more than 3%. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Right, thanks very much. I'm going to open the floor to questions there. As you can hear, that's just some of the brief topics that were discussed today. So if there's anyone that wants to ask any questions on anything else from anyone on the panel here, fire away.
Paul, just on those mortgage interest cap, have you got a costed proposal for that?
We have a bill, and I mean there's no cost to the exchequer of doing it. So about a year and a half ago, the government introduced a cap on the amount of money that can be charged by kind of predatory money lenders, short-term payday loans, all that kind of thing. So they introduced a bill to do it. So it shows it can be done, and we're simply saying, well, this should be done across the board in terms of mortgages, to say that banks cannot legally charge more than an interest rate of 3% on mortgages, which would obviously make a huge difference to
and
people.
how do you feel about the government's, they've sort of indicated that they might have mortgage interest relief. Would you be in favour of that? And that would be targeted only people who are at risk of losing their homes.
I mean, look, something is better than nothing for people, so mortgage interest relief will be better for people than no mortgage interest relief, but it's a bit like the energy credit. Again, people welcome something rather than nothing, but if the government just does these things without actually interfering in the market and stopping, dealing with the fundamental issue, which is the profiteering, which flows from this privatised nature of all these systems, well then it doesn't fundamentally deal with the issue. So in case of the energy payments, there was nothing to stop the energy companies simply saying, okay, we'll artificially keep our prices high and pocket a good portion of each of those 200 euros. So similarly, we think you actually need to deal with the fundamental issue, which is banks really ripping people off in the context of them making very substantial with the European Central Bank.
Paul, you referred to 1 in 10 people using food banks. That's a statistic I haven't heard before. Maybe you could just elaborate on that a little in terms of the basis for it. And just in terms of Ruth, you were talking about a 12 billion surplus this year, and the advice that was given by the central bank. Given that corporation tax is a very variable source of income, how would you recommend that surplus to be invested? Would it be in capital spending or in one-off spending? You could elaborate a little bit on that. And you're referring to homelessness. Maybe we might ask Richard about homelessness and talk to you yesterday about Dundee, but how homelessness has affected your constituency in Dundee. Maybe you could elaborate a bit on that if you have a chance.
In February of this year from Barnardos, where they said 1 in 10 parents are saying they're using food banks in order to be able to feed their children. I know that seems like a very high figure, and at the time, I don't know if he was Tánaiste or Taoiseach at the time, but Leo Varadkar said, I kind of wonder whether that's true or whatever, but it just speaks to how bad the crisis is. People have real difficulty out there. I mean, I've been going door to door trying to build for the Cost of Living Coalition protest. I ask pretty much everyone I meet, I ask, what's the number one thing that you see in terms of the cost of living crisis? And people say groceries, because it's immediately on their mind, and everybody knows that like a grocery shop that previously cost 70, 80 quid now costs 120, 130, or a big family shop, 150, 160 is now up to over 200 euros. People really experience that. People experience it in terms of electricity, the amount of people who tell you that they're really saving in terms of heating, they're not putting the heating on, they're not planning to put the heating on, like that's a big thing. And people are forced into real crisis situations. And again, it doesn't have to be that way. In a country with more than 10 billion euro surplus now 2 years in a row, the idea that the government cannot act to protect people from the cost of living crisis, that's just not, it's not credible. The government can act and it has to act.
Move the mic over as well.
Okay, so obviously not being in the Dáil, I haven't been sitting writing a budget for the government. But I think with 12 billion as an example, you could build 60,000 social and affordable homes at 200,000 each. Now, I'm not advocating that they spend every cent of it on building houses, but I think it gives you an idea of how you could eradicate that scourge from society if you have the will. I know there are other problems like building labour. Obviously, we would advocate that they would invest in health, in education, in the essential services that people need. And it isn't actually just that we're advocating it, I think it's pretty widespread throughout society that people believe that should happen. I've been knocking on doors in Leo Varadkar's bailiwick in Castleknock, and people there can't get childcare. People are paying, massive amounts on things like that, and they want to see investment. Even this idea of tax cuts being pitted against it. In relation to multinationals, I think it's no secret that we would say that you should not be reliant on foreign direct investment as the cornerstone of the economy. Also, it's the tip of the iceberg of what could be brought in. We all know the Apple, the sweetheart deals, that they're not even paying the 12.5%. A lot of them are paying 0% in actual fact. So I think I agree with you. It is. We see that with the tech sector this year, to rely on that as your as well. Don't know if that answers your question.
Sure, yeah.
Can I just make one comment, because I'm on the Budget Scrutiny Committee and I'll be dealing with some of the issues that you're asking about there. And I think it's very important to stress that increasing investment in housing now is going to save current expenditure outlays by approximately €1 billion a year and rising, that is going out on HAPS, RAS and leasing payments. So it is prudential expenditure to use the surplus we have now to build public and affordable housing. It's going to save current expenditure outlays that are ballooning in that area over the future years. And the other important point to stress is People Before Profit and Solidarity are actually the most prudential fiscal party from a fiscal point of view in the Dáil. Because not only are we saying we should use some of the surplus to invest in infrastructure like housing that will save money in the future, but we're also proposing to raise additional revenue, significant additional revenue, that argue for financial transaction tax, that argue for increasing employers' PRSI, that argue for higher taxes on the highest earners. So while as other parties are actually playing from a fiscal future, we're actually arguing the sustainable position, which is to tax the wealth and profits that are being concentrated at the top in order to fund expenditure on housing, on key infrastructure, and on addressing the cost of living crisis.
Would you fail in with that other group, Richard?
Well, I think we are the most consistent in arguing for things like wealth taxes, for financial transaction taxes, for raising that. And just then on the housing crisis, yeah, I mean, Dáil is a weather vane for what's coming down the line for the rest of the country. It always has been in terms of the housing crisis. It's currently got the highest rent levels in the country, with average rents now between 2,500 and 3,000 fixed income. If you find yourself without a place to live or facing eviction, you are absolutely in dire straits, because there is nothing available. About 70 to 80% of the people, and what's happening in Dáil today is going to happen everywhere else in Dublin and the urban centres tomorrow. And we can see that has been the picture. So it is a dire situation. And it also means if you are homeless, and we have many people in my area, as in other areas, are homeless, you're trapped there. You're trapped because the HAP levels won't allow you to. That is affordable, and if you are over the thresholds for social housing, you've no chance at all. In fact, sometimes you're in a worse position because your income couldn't possibly hope to pay for the rents that are out there, but you're not entitled to any subsidy whatsoever towards the cost of accommodation. So it is dire, and the government are just not acting on the demand out there.
Can I ask while Richard just has the microphone there, and apologies, I'm going to have to go after this answer because I've got a bulletin. So the big protest that you're organising is for 3 days before the budget. Is it, given that the budget is now constructed over multiple months, and there's a summer economic statement and all the other bits and pieces that go into it, is it not either naive or cynical to try to suggest to people that they can influence the government by showing up 3 days beforehand?
No, the record was very clear last year. In the last weekend before the budget, things shifted. So the pressure of people power and the knowledge on the part of the government that the build-up for that protest is happening. Whenever we're involved in organising a protest in the Dáil, all the TDs from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are always asking us to put serious pressure on the government in advance of the budget.
Is there anyone else that wants to come in?
Can I just ask, Ruth, is it your intention to run for a Dáil seat next time around, next year or the year after? And then Breed, what's your intention to not run next time?
Oh yeah, no, definitely run. I wouldn't be here otherwise.
Just been thinking.
Yeah, so just to say a really quick thing, like I'm in the constituency of Leo Harapper and there's Blanchardstown, which covers a lot of the constituency. It's the 5th largest area, most populated in the country. So it's got huge issues, and thankfully there's going to be another seat there. So I'll be fighting to win one of those seats as a voice for workers, for women, and on all of the issues that we're raising. Thanks, Ruth. Bridget?
Well, I'm definitely not running again, but I have this wonderful candidate here beside me, Hazel Denartwin, who's a councillor for the last 7 years, and she will be running in South Central, and I'll be working very, very hard to get my supporters to vote people before profit to vote for Hazel. And as regards Europe, I've no intention of running for Europe, but I'm not hanging up my boots. I'm going to be probably more active on the ground than I have been, because I'll be outside the Dáil and doing particularly campaigns on anti-racism and on climate action. I really want to build those two movements into something very significant.